זכרנו יברך אבס בבס ישראל יברך אבס בבס ahana יברך ידו יקי תמיד למען
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Erev Shabbos. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Melissa in Great Neck, Renee in Indiana, Nancy in North Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, Belle in Virginia, Yehuda in South Carolina, Guy in Ohio, Lorraine in Texas, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandora in the Bronx, Chaim in Florida, Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. Continuing our journey through the final chapter of Tractate Makkos. We're doing page 19 today, right? Page 19. There are 24 pages in the tractate. We'll do a double tomorrow night. Hate to do that late on Saturday night, but it's still going to be under an hour, I believe. And so that should set us up, to complete this tractate. What would that be like? Monday, Tuesday? We'll see, but soon. And we're slowly chipping away, getting caught up. We're doing well. And the challenge continues. This is not easy. This chapter 3 in Makkos. When do lashes apply? It's not so much that lashes were given so many times in history. It's really more the question, the halachic question, is when does flogging apply? Probably didn't happen, right? Because it had to be witnesses who warned the person, if you do this, you'll be subject to lashes, and he did it anyway. But really the question is, did somebody violate a negative prohibition where there was not a positive commandment that would remedy the situation? Is it a chorus-bearing penalty, etc.? And because there's so many nuances and kind of the interplay between the various prohibitions and punishments, it's really a challenge, right? A legal, mental, analytical challenge to understand when lashes would apply. So let's dig in. We're picking this up right at the very bottom of page 18b. Rava Bar Ada says that Rabbi Yitzchak says, with regard to first fruits, bikurim. Now we're on page 19a. So the offering of first fruits that the people would bring to Jerusalem. And we saw in the Mishna that so only priests can eat of the bikurim, and they have to be in a state of purity, ritual purity. But more important, the question was, if the priest eats it before it's permissible for him to eat it, then the priest would be subject to lashes. And then the question is, well, what renders the bikurim permissible for eating? Is it that the person who brings them recites the verses, or which is what the Mishna said, but in fact, that was a minority view of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Kiva, but the majority said it's not the recital of the verses, it's the laying them down beside the altar until the fruits have basically been presented to God at the temple. That's when they become available for eating by the priests. Now, we've mentioned this recital of verses a few times. I thought I would just read this section to you from Deuteronomy 26, verses 1 through 11. This is right at the beginning of Torah portion Kitavo, or if a more Ashkenaz pronunciation, Kisavo. So Deuteronomy 26, right? Let's just start right where it says, so when you have come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a possession and have taken possession and settled in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, put it in a basket, and go to the place that the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. Right, so for the first few hundred years, this was in Shiloh, and then later, once David brought the tabernacle up to Jerusalem, and then eventually the temple was built by his son Solomon, this was the place that God chose for us to bring offerings, where the altar stood. So that's what we're talking about. Continues the verse, you shall go to the priest officiating at that time and say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our ancestors to give us. And the priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord. Right, that's setting it down beside the altar. And you shall then make this declaration before the Lord your God. So this is the recital of the verses. So the one who brings the fruit says, my ancestor was a wandering Aramean. He went down into Egypt and lived there as a stranger, just a handful of souls. There he became a nation, large, mighty, and great. And the Egyptians dealt cruelly with us and oppressed us, subjecting us to harsh labor. We cried out to the Lord, God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our voice, and he saw our oppression, our toil, and our enslavement. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and his arm stretched forth with terrifying power, with signs, and with wonders. You can see why we quote a lot of this in the Passover Haggadah. He brought us into this place. He gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now I am bringing the first fruit of the land that you, O Lord, have given me. Set the basket down before the Lord, and then bow down low before the Lord your God. Then you with the Levites and the migrants who live among you shall rejoice in all the good the Lord your God has bestowed on you and on your household. So it's a real opportunity that God gives to us to say thank you, right? The whole purpose of bringing the first fruits is to say thank you, and he's created a ritual for us that encourages us to recall what the Lord has done for us and why we should be grateful. Now, as we sort of rise in our spirituality and our faithfulness or observance, I was a very secular Jew when I was young. Gradually, we connected, started going to synagogue every Shabbos. In the beginning, kind of unaffiliated, unusual synagogue, then a kind of traditional conservative synagogue, kind of conservadox minyan within that synagogue. And eventually we became Orthodox Jews. And along the way, got more and more, observant about saying a blessing. Most of us, even when we're not very observant, know that at a Shabbos dinner, we're going to say a blessing over the wine, we're going to say a blessing over the bread. But really, our sages teach us you can't eat anything in this world without saying a blessing. It's considered stealing if you don't say thank you to God and bless God for giving you what you're about to eat. And then there's a blessing you say after you eat that food. And really, all of these blessings, if we don't just rush, the problem is, as we become more observant and it just becomes a fact of our life that we always say a blessing, okay, so we rush through the blessing. And we said it, and did we really have kavanah? Did we have an intentionality? Did we listen to our own words coming out of our mouth so that we're blessing God with some real gratitude? And so an opportunity like Bikurim, and when we're learning about Bikurim, let's let that inspire us. That anytime we're going to say any kind of a blessing, and just regularly, hopefully every day, and certainly as often as possible, take stock in our lives and say, wow, I could complain and whine about the things that I'm trying to achieve, but God has already given me so much. If I'm alive and I'm breathing, already that's a lot. If I have a home around me, if I have loved ones around me, incredible. if I'm food secure, if I can look forward, to a time in the future where I'll have some savings that will provide for me. I mean, there's just so many things that we can be thankful for. And so we might want to, regularly read these verses because we don't have this opportunity to bring the first fruits. And right now, the temple is not standing in Jerusalem, and we can't do this. But when we learn these verses, it's a wonderful way to plug into that gratitude. Okay, so the point is, right now we're talking about, is that a person has brought first fruits to Jerusalem when the temple is standing, and those fruits they sort of decorate the altar, and then it's a gift to the priest. The priest can eat it, but they can't eat from those fruits that are being brought to Jerusalem until they've been laid beside the altar. And even though it's not necessary in terms of preventing a flogging, obviously the priest should wait lechatila in the first place until the person bringing it has reciting the verses that I just read to you. So, says the Gemara here. Rav Bar Ada says that Rav Yitzchak says, with regard to the first fruits, from when is a non-priest who eats first fruits liable to receive death at the hands of heaven for their consumption? A priest who eats it before the whole process is done, okay, he's subject to flogging. But only priests are permitted to eat bikurim. So if a non-priest eats bikurim, the punishment for that is karas, excision, death at the hands of the heavenly court. But from when does that liability kick in? So it says the Gemara, one is liable from when the first fruits will enter inside the temple. So the Gemara notes, in accordance with whose opinion is this law stated? It is in accordance with the opinion of this Tana. As it was taught in Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer says, with regard to first fruits, bikurim, some of which are outside and some of which are inside the temple, the halakhic status of those that are outside the temple is like the non-sacred produce for all matters concerning them. And the halakhic status of those that are inside the temple is like that of consecrated produce for all matters concerning them. So people would bring bikurim to Jerusalem and to the temple on those pilgrimages, but not all of the fruits made it into the temple. A lot of the fruit was just used to decorate the streets. That other people could eat. That was not only for the consumption of the priests, but the fruit that was actually carried inside into the temple, that only priests could eat. And if a non-priest ate that, karas. Rav Shesha says, with regard to bikurim, the lack of placement alongside the altar invalidates them, while the lack of recitation of the accompanying Torah verses does not invalidate them, as we've seen. So the Gemara notes, in accordance with whose opinion is this law stated? It is in accordance with the opinion of this Tana, Rabbi Yishmael. As it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosei says 3 statements in the name of 3 elders. And one of those statements is that which Rabbi Yishmael says. One might have thought that a person would bring second tithe, maaser sheini, as we talked about a lot about yesterday, up to Jerusalem in the present, after the destruction of the temple, and eat it there. And ostensibly, it could be derived by means of a logical inference that one may not do so, right? So that maaser sheini, which was what you were going to eat when you go up to Jerusalem for a pilgrimage festival, or what you're going to deconsecrate, sell that second tithe produce and exchange it for money, and then you would take that money, that particular money, those coins, up to Jerusalem, and then you would buy food and drink during the pilgrimage that you're up there. So what is being said here is, well, we can't go to Jerusalem and bring offerings in the period after the temple has been destroyed, but maybe we could still go to Jerusalem and use our maaser sheini to eat and drink while we're in Jerusalem, even if we can't bring offerings because the temple has been destroyed. And what they're saying is, no, we don't use maaser sheini for that purpose in the post-destruction, and post-exile period. Why? Why don't we do this? We gather it like this. A firstborn offering, a bechor, right, which is the firstborn male offspring of a female kosher animal, is offered in the temple. A firstborn offering requires bringing it to the place, to Jerusalem, and eating it there. And second tithe produce requires bringing it to the place. So just as the firstborn offering may be eaten there only in the presence of the temple, because it's an offering, so too second tithe produce may be eaten there only in the presence of the temple. Even though maaser sheini is not an offering, it is consecrated and it is only eaten in Jerusalem when the temple is standing. Rabbi Yishmael continues and counters, what is notable about a firstborn? Bringing the firstborn to Jerusalem is required only in the presence of the temple, because it is notable in that it requires placement of its blood and its sacrificial portions upon the altar. It is an offering. Will you say the same with regard to maaser sheini, which requires only that it be consumed in Jerusalem? So he suggests first fruits will prove that placement of blood upon the altar is not a factor, as they do not require placement of blood upon the altar, and yet they are brought to Jerusalem only in the presence of the temple. So that would be a proof for maaser sheini, the same thing. Rabbi Yishmael counters, well, wait a minute. What is notable about bechorim? They are notable in that they require placement alongside the altar. Perhaps since maaser sheini produce does not require placement at all, even in the present, one ought to bring it to Jerusalem and eat it there. Rabbi Yishmael concludes, therefore the verse states, and you shall eat before the Lord your God the tithe of your grain and the firstborn of your herd and your flock. Deuteronomy 14:23. And the Torah juxtaposes maaser sheini to the firstborn. Just as the firstborn may be eaten there only in the presence of the temple, so too maaser sheini may be eaten there only in the presence of the temple. And the Gemara explains, the proof of Rav Shesh's opinion from the Baraisa is like this. And if it is so that the lack of recitation of the Torah verses invalidates the ritual of bikurim, let the Baraisa refute the derivation by saying, what is notable about bikurim? They are notable in that they require recitation of Torah verses and placement alongside the altar. Both are requirements. Nonetheless, if the verses were not recited, but they were placed alongside the altar, and then a priest ate, he would not be flogged. Rav Ashi says, there is no proof from the fact that recitation is not mentioned. Although the lack of recitation does not invalidate the first fruits, is there no mitzvah? Everyone agrees that there is a mitzvah. There is a commandment for the one bringing the bikurim to recite the Torah verses when he hands that basket to the priest at the temple. And this refutes the proof from first fruits in that manner. As in the case of second tithe, there is no mitzvah to recite Torah verses. So rather, Rav Ashi said that there's a different reason that recitation was omitted from the refutation. It is that there is the case of bikurim of a convert who needs to recite, I have come to the land that the Lord swore unto our fathers. And since he cannot say it, as the Lord did not swear to give the land to the ancestors of the convert, he brings the first fruit, but he does not read the portion. Therefore, the obligation to recite the Torah verses is not clear-cut for the Tana, and he did not mention it. Right? So interesting, a ger, a convert, does not recite those verses because it was not the father of his father of his father of his father that came out of Egypt. And so it would not be truthful if he recited that portion of the verses. So the ger does bring bikurim when the temple is standing, and he does lay them alongside the altar, which, as we've seen, is really the operative ritual that accompanies the bikurim. But the ger doesn't recite the verses, and that's further support for the fact that the verses are not indispensable to that ritual. Laying them alongside the altar is. The Gemara asks, why was it necessary for the Tana to derive that maaser sheini produce is not brought to Jerusalem at present from the juxtaposition in the verse, and let the derivation revert to its starting point and derive the law through an analogy derived from the common factor of first fruits and the bechor, the firstborn. Each of the sources neutralizes the significance of the notable factor in the other. Leaving the common factor, one must bring them to Jerusalem. So from there it may be derived that second tithe produce, maaser sheini, which one must also bring to Jerusalem, need not be brought there when the temple is not standing. And the Gemara answers the juxtaposition is necessary due to the fact that this analogy can be refuted. What is notable about the common factor that is true of both maaser sheini and bechor? It is notable in that they have an aspect involving the altar, the mizbeach, which is not so in the case of maaser sheini, right? The fruits, the bikurim, are laid alongside the altar. The bechor is an offering, and its blood is sprinkled on the altar. But maaser sheini is just eaten by the pilgrims in Jerusalem. It never gets brought to the temple. It has nothing to do with the altar. The Gemara asks, and what opinion does Rabbi Yishmael hold that led to his initial assumption that one is obligated to bring a bechor to Jerusalem only when the temple is standing? If he maintains in general that the initial consecration of the temple sanctified Jerusalem for its time and sanctified Jerusalem forever, right? So we have this ruling elsewhere in the Gemara that Jerusalem was, is, and always will be a holy city. Doesn't matter what happens. God forbid some attack should level it. Please God, nothing ever like that should happen. But it's been attacked many times in history. The temple was destroyed. The Temple Mount has been desecrated by having non-holy temple on top of it. Nevertheless, the city of Jerusalem is sanctified and will remain holy for all time. So if that's the case, why not bring a bechor even when the temple is not standing? Why not bring bikurim even when the temple is not standing? And why not bring maaser sheini to Jerusalem even when the temple is not standing? That's the question. So then one should also be obligated to bring a bechor to the place where the temple was and sacrifice it on an altar and eat it there. So if he maintains the initial consecration of the temple sanctified Jerusalem for its time but did not sanctify Jerusalem forever, then he should raise a dilemma even with regard to the bechor, whether it may be eaten in Jerusalem at all. So Ravina said, actually, Rabbi Yishmael maintains that the initial consecration of the temple sanctified Jerusalem for its time, but did not sanctify Jerusalem forever. And why is it obvious to him that the firstborn is not eaten? It is because here he is stating the law with regard to the case of the firstborn whose blood was sprinkled before the destruction of the temple. And the temple was then destroyed, and its flesh is still intact. And based on a juxtaposition, you shall sprinkle their blood upon the altar, and their flesh shall be for you. From Numbers 18, verses 17 and 18, we compare the status of its flesh to the status of its blood. So just as its blood must be sprinkled at a time when the altar is standing, otherwise, how could you sprinkle it if the altar wasn't there? So too, its flesh may be eaten only at a time when the altar is standing. And so he compares the status of maaser sheini produce to the status of a firstborn offering and derives that one may partake of maaser sheini in Jerusalem only when the temple is standing. So the Gemara asks, and does a matter derived via juxtaposition then teach another matter via juxtaposition? The principle with regard to the laws of consecrated matters is that a law derived via one of the hermeneutical principles cannot serve as a basis for derivation of another law. Right? We can maybe use a hermeneutical principle like these two things are next to each other so we can derive a principle from that, or this word is used in two places and it connects them so we can derive a law from that. But then having derived a law, you can't then use that law to compare with another verse in the Torah and derive the derivative of a derivative, derive from a derivative, right? You can't, because then it would never end and you could keep making new laws. So you can use the 13 hermeneutical principles of Rabbi Yishmael to derive new laws, or the sages could. We don't anymore. But they couldn't derive a law from a law that had already been derived, but it was not explicit in the Torah. So what's going on here? So the Gemara answers, maaser sheini of grain is non-sacred produce. And the laws of non-sacred matters derived via hermeneutical principles may serve as the basis for deriving other laws using hermeneutical principles. Now we're on 19b. Well, the Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says in determining whether a derivation involves consecrated matters or not, we follow the matter that is derived from a matter derived from juxtaposition. Since in this case, the matter derived is maaser sheini, which for these purposes is deemed non-sacred, its halakhic status may be derived from juxtaposition with the laws of sacrificial matters. But according to the one who says, we follow the matter that teaches, i.e., from the law which is derived from the law from which the halakha is derived, then what is there to say? The status of maaser sheini may not be derived by means of juxtaposition from the status of the bechor, which itself was derived from the blood of the offering, because the bechor is a sacrificial matter, right? That is a korban. It is a sacrifice that is brought into the temple and taken on the altar. Maaser sheini is not. So the Gemara answers, this is not a matter derived from a juxtaposition, as the status of the bechor is not derived from the status of blood. Blood and flesh are one matter. There is only one derivation in this case, which is that the status of maaser sheini is derived from the status of the blood and the flesh of the bechor. The Mishna taught, right? Our Mishna here, Mishna number 3, or Mishna number 2 rather, in chapter 3, which we're going to complete today, God willing. This Mishna taught that one who ate offerings of the most sacred order, so that'd be like sin offerings and guilt offerings, outside the temple courtyard, and the portion of a sin offering that is eaten is only eaten by a priest, and it can only be eaten within the temple courtyard. So if somebody ate from a sin offering, which is the offerings of the most sacred order, outside of the temple, this would be a major transgression. Right, so the Mishnah teaches that one who ate offerings of the most sacred order outside the temple courtyard and one who ate second tithe produce outside the wall of Jerusalem is flogged with 40 lashes. So presumably this is a priest who's eating from the chatas, the sin offering, but he's doing it outside the temple rather than inside. If it was a non-priest who ate meat from a sin offering, I think that would be kares. The Gemara asks, didn't we already learn this one time in the previous Mishnah on page 13a, that one who ate maaser sheini or sacrificial food that was not redeemed is flogged? Why does the Tana repeat the law of second tithe produce in this Mishnah? And Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, these are different cases. The latter clause, meaning this Mishnah, is in the case of ritually pure maaser sheini, and, right, tahor, maaser sheini, and a ritually pure person who eats it outside the wall of Jerusalem. So the thing that he's done wrong is that he ate it outside the walls of Jerusalem. But the maaser sheini was tahor, it was not tamei, right, impure, and he was not tamei, he was not impure, he was in a state of purity. The first clause, the previous Mishnah, is in the case of ritually pure maaser sheini and a ritually pure person who eats it within the walls of Jerusalem. So the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that one is liable to receive lashes due to impurity? It is derived as it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon says that, so the first case was a ritually pure person and ritually pure maaser sheini, but he ate it outside of Jerusalem. The second case is a person who's tamei, or who's eating maaser sheini that's tamei, but within the walls of Jerusalem. So now the Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that one is liable to receive lashes because of tumah, because he's ritually impure, because let's say he came into contact with a dead body, so now he's tamei until he goes through a purification ritual. So can he eat maaser sheini, which the maaser sheini is pure and he is impure? Can he eat it? No. It is derived as it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon says, that the verse in the portion of the declaration of tithes, I have not put any of it away when impure. This is a general formulation that is interpreted to mean whether I am impure, whether I am tamei, and the maaser sheini is tahor, pure, or whether I am tahor and the maaser sheini is tamei. So Rabbi Shimon adds, and I do not know where it is that one is warned, i.e., where there is a prohibition with regard to eating. Although it is clear from the verse cited that it is prohibited for one to eat maaser sheini produce while tamei, the source for this prohibition is not clear. Now, before citing the source of the prohibition, the Gemara asks, with regard to a person who is tamei in his body, he is tamei, and who partakes of maaser sheini, it is explicitly written, a soul that touches it shall be tamei until the evening and shall not eat of the consecrated food. So if you can say that this food is consecrated, and maaser sheini is consecrated, well, we have an explicit provision that a person who is tamei cannot eat holy food, consecrated food, right? He cannot eat consecrated food. Wait a minute, hold on. He cannot eat the kadashim, right? Kedoshim. He cannot eat holy foods. So, and the sages interpreted this to include maaser sheini, right? Because it was consecrated that you can only use it when you go up to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festival. Pesach, Shavuos, or Sukkot. Now, this is a prohibition with regard to a person who is tamei partaking of maaser sheini. But when Rabbi Shimon says, I do not know where it is that one is warned with regard to eating, he is stating with regard to the tuma of the maaser sheini itself. From where is this warning derived? The Torah says, if you are tamei, you can't eat maaser sheini. From where do we derive that if the maaser sheini is tamei, something touched it and rendered it impure? Even though the person is tahor, the person is in a state of ritual purity, from where do we derive that he may not eat this maaser sheini that became tamei? And the Gemara answers, it is derived as it is written with regard to maaser sheini. You may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain or of your wine or of your oil, from Deuteronomy 12:17. And later, with regard to the blemished firstborn animal, the bechor that becomes blemished, the verse states, within your gates you may eat it. The impure and the pure may eat it alike. Whether a person is tamei or tahor, he may eat a blemished bechor. Right? That would have been a bechor that instead of being offered up on the altar, because there was a blemish on it, it had to be deconsecrated, its value exchanged for money, and maybe that money used for something else, to bring some other kind of offering. But the blemished bechor that was then deconsecrated, or maybe because it's blemished, you're just free to eat it, and you don't even have to. It is deconsecrated by its blemish, and then at that point, you can eat it. And you can eat it whether you're tamei or tahor. So what are we learning there? So hold on. So the Gemara stated that the case of maaser sheini that was not redeemed, cited in the previous Mishna, is referring to maaser sheini that is impure. The maaser sheini is tamei. And this indicates that maaser sheini that becomes tamei can be redeemed. Right? Maaser sheini does have to be redeemed. So if it becomes tamei, it's not just disqualified and now anyone can eat it anywhere they want. Maaser sheini is consecrated, can only be eaten in Jerusalem. But it has to be eaten in a state of purity. So if the maaser sheini becomes tamei, then you have to deconsecrate it, exchange it for money. The money is not tamei. The money can then be used to purchase more food, and that food will be the consecrated food that you eat as your maaser sheini, unlike the bechor. Let me just read where this law ended up so it's a little bit clearer. The blemished bechor of a kosher domesticated animal, whether it was born blemished or a blemish subsequently developed, is the property of a priest. Okay, so it does have to be given to a priest, and the priest may eat it anywhere, or sell it, or give it to anyone, even to a non-Jew, as its halakhic status is that of a non-sacred animal because of the blemish. It still has to be given to a priest, but it's considered non-sacred, and it can be eaten by whether it is tamei or the person is tamei. And this is in accordance with the verse, and if there will be any blemish therein, lameness or blindness, the impure and the pure may eat it alike, like the gazelle and like the hart. So, like the deer, H-A-R-T. So the prohibitions that apply to one in a state of impurity relate exclusively to entering the temple and to partaking of consecrated food, including teruma, right, which is the first 2% of any tithing process that's given to a priest. It has to be tahor, and the priest has to be tahor when he eats it, and no one else may eat of it. And this applies to maaser sheini. It has to be tahor, and the person has to be tahor, pure. With regard to non-sacred items, the Torah permits anyone to eat impure foods and come into contact with impurity, and impure and ritually pure people may eat from the same bowl without concern, right? So it's not that if you come into contact with the sheretz or with a dead body and then you become tamei, that you can't eat, right? You can't walk into the temple. You can't eat maaser sheini. If you're a priest, you still can't eat teruma, but you can eat. You just have to eat non-sacred food. And non-sacred food, whether it's tamei or tahor, you can eat it, whether you are tamei or tahor. There were the chaverim, which were certain people that went extra mile, even though they were not required to do this. They tried to eat in a state of purity and food that was in a state of purity for all their meals, but that is definitely not obligated. That is not the law. It is, as Rabbi Lazar says, from where is it derived with regard to maaser sheini that became tamei, that one may redeem it even in Jerusalem? It is derived, now this is maaser sheini that became tamei. If it didn't become tamei, then once you get it into Jerusalem, you don't sell it. Now you have to eat it, right? You couldn't eat it outside of Jerusalem. There you could sell it and the money would become consecrated. Then you go to Jerusalem, you use that money to buy food, and then that food is consecrated as maaser sheini. But if your maaser sheini became tamei, then you can sell it even within the walls of Jerusalem. How do we know? From where is it derived with regard to maaser sheini that became tamei, that one may redeem it even in Jerusalem? It is derived, as the verse states, because you are unable to carry it, se'eto, as the place is too far from you, and you shall turn it into money. Right? Standard, bringing money and deconsecrating maaser sheini at your farm, turning it into money so you could take that up to Jerusalem rather than carry your watermelons that you grew on the farm. And se'et means nothing other than eating, as it is stated, and portions, masot, were taken to them from before him in Genesis 43:34, and this was referring to gifts of food. Therefore, the phrase, you are unable, se'eto, means you cannot eat it, referring to a case where it is impure. The Torah states that in that case, one may redeem the produce even if it is already within the walls of Jerusalem and not outside the walls of Jerusalem. If the maaser sheini enters the walls of Jerusalem and it is still tahor, then you cannot sell it. Then you have to eat it and eat it with other people, but you can no longer sell it. The Gemara cites another related interpretation. Rav Bevai says that Rav Asi said, from where is it derived with regard to maaser sheini that is tahor, ritually pure, that one may redeem it even if it is one stride outside the wall of Jerusalem, contrary to the plain understanding of the verse, as the place is too far from you. Right? Jerusalem is not too far from you if you're standing one step outside the walls. Nevertheless, even at that stage, you could turn the maaser sheini into money and then walk in Jerusalem and spend that money to buy new food, and then that food would become your maaser sheini. But since the verse says you can turn it into money because Jerusalem is too far away, then why would we allow him to redeem the maaser sheini for money when he's standing one step outside of Jerusalem? This is as it is stated, because you are unable to carry it, indicating that if there is any reason that one is unable to carry the produce and bring it into Jerusalem, he may redeem it regardless of its distance from Jerusalem. The Gemara objects to this. That verse is necessary to derive the law of Rabbi Lazar, that one may redeem maaser sheini that became tamei even in Jerusalem. I can use the same verse to prove that you can redeem maaser sheini that is tahor even outside the walls of Jerusalem, even if you're one step away. I can use the same verse to prove both things. Prove both things. So the Gemara answers, if so, that the verse is required to derive only the law of Rabbi Lazar, then let the verse state explicitly you are unable to eat it. What is the reason that the verse employs the term se'eto? And the Gemara objects right away and says, and say that the term comes entirely for this purpose, to teach that one may redeem the produce even if it is not far from the city, and nothing is derived with regard to maaser sheini that became tamei. And the Gemara answers, if so, let the verse state you are unable to take it. So why does the verse employ the term se'eto? Conclude two conclusions from it. One may redeem maaser sheini that's tahor, even right outside the walls, and one may redeem maaser sheini that's tamei even within the walls of Jerusalem. Now, in connection to the discussion of where one may redeem maaser sheini, the Gemara relates, Rav Chanina and Rav Oshaya sat, and a dilemma was raised before them. If the maaser sheini is at the entrance of Jerusalem, then what is the law, right? It's neither outside the walls nor inside the walls. It's in the entrance itself. Then what is the law? Can one redeem it there? And the Gemara elaborates, it is obvious in the case where one is outside Jerusalem and his burden of maaser sheini is inside Jerusalem. The tithe is admitted by the walls of Jerusalem and its status is that of the produce that entered the city. But in a case, so even if you're standing outside of Jerusalem, but you take your maaser sheini and put it on a stick and extend it inside the walls, then, right, if it was tamei, you could redeem it. If it was tahor, you can't, because the maaser sheini has entered the city. Well, what if you enter the city, but you're holding your maaser sheini on a pole and it is still outside the city? It's your maaser sheini, you're in Jerusalem, but your produce is still outside the city. Could you still redeem it outside the city? Because it hasn't entered the walls. Right, but in a case where one is inside Jerusalem, his burden of maaser sheini is outside, then what is the law? A certain elder taught them a baraisa of the school of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. It is written, quote, as the place is too far from you, mimecha, in Deuteronomy 14:24, and the term mimecha is interpreted as from your fullness, mimeluacha, indicating the person and all his appurtenances, including the maaser sheini that he's carrying. So if any part of him or his gear is inside the city, it is as though he is entirely inside the city, and therefore he may not redeem the maaser sheini. So it's once he enters the city, even though the maaser sheini is on a pole and is still outside the city that he's carrying, but it's his pole and his maaser sheini, and he's inside Jerusalem, now he can no longer redeem that maaser sheini unless it's tamei. Rav Papa raises a related dilemma. If one is holding the maaser sheini on a reed and it is suspended behind him, what is the law? Since he is carrying the burden, does it fall in the category of his fullness, and it is no different from a burden that he bears on it? Oh, so I'm sorry. The first case, it's more like in his backpack. So even though his backpack is still outside the city and he's inside the city, it's considered that the maaser sheini entered the city. Now we do the case of it's on a pole, like a bamboo pole. So he's inside the city, and there's a pole that he is holding that's connecting him to his maaser sheini. Do we say that it's like it was in his backpack, which was connected to his body, and so even just as soon as his body entered the city, he can no longer redeem it? Or do we say, since it's a longer separation and there's a pole between him and the maaser sheini, that it can still be redeemed because it's still considered outside the city, even though his body's inside the city? And what's the answer to that question? Teku, it shall stand unresolved. New subject. Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to maaser sheini, from when is one liable to receive lashes for eating it outside the walls of Jerusalem? It is from when the produce entered within the wall of Jerusalem. And what is the reason for this? It is derived, as the verse states, with regard to second tithe produce. Before the Lord your God you shall eat it. And it is written in the previous verse, you may not eat within your gates. So from which it is derived that anywhere that we read concerning it, before the Lord your God you shall eat it, we read concerning it the prohibition, you may not eat it within your gates, i.e., it may not be eaten outside the walls of Jerusalem. And anywhere that we do not read concerning it, before the Lord your God you shall eat it, as the produce remained outside the walls, we do not read concerning it the prohibition, you may not eat it within your gates. So you don't become liable to flogging until the produce enters the city. Then if you took some of it outside the city, you would be liable to flogging. Now the Gemara raised an objection from that which Rabbi Yosef says with regard to a priest, that a fig of untied produce came into his possession and he seeks to separate terumos and tithes from it. He says, this fig, I designate its teruma at its stem. I designate its first tithe at its north side, and I designate its second tithe, its maaser sheini, at its south side. And it is a year when maaser sheini is separated, i.e. the first, second, fourth, or fifth years of the Shemitah cycle. And he is standing in Jerusalem when he recites this formula. Or he says that poor man's tithe shall be designated at its south side if it is a year of poor man's tithe, i.e. the third and sixth years of the Shemitah cycle. And he is located anywhere in the outlying areas, not in Jerusalem. In those cases, if he ate the fig, he is flogged with one set of lashes because he ate it without separating teruma of the tithe from the first tithe, and he is consequently liable for eating untithed produce. Had he separated teruma of the tithe, it would have been permitted for him to eat the entire fig, as it is permitted for a priest to partake of both teruma gedola and teruma of the tithe. Now we're on page 20a. Just getting a head start on tomorrow. And a non-priest who eats the fig is flogged with 2 sets of lashes for both eating untithed produce and eating the teruma therein, which is forbidden for anyone who's not a priest. And the Baraisa notes, as if the non-priest ate the fig initially before separating teruma and tithes, he is flogged with only 1 set of lashes for eating untithed produce. Once he separated the teruma and tithes, he is flogged for eating teruma as well. The Gemara infers from the statement in the Baraisa, and it is a year when second tithe is separated and he is in Jerusalem, that the reason he is flogged with 2 sets of lashes is that he is currently in Jerusalem, where it is permitted to partake of second tithe produce. But if he ate the fig in the outlying areas outside of Jerusalem, and he designated second tithe in the fig, he is flogged with 3 sets of lashes. It is apparent that even if this second tithe produce has not entered within the walls of Jerusalem, one is liable to receive lashes for its consumption. And this contradicts Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, as he holds that one is liable to receive lashes for eating second tithe produce only if it entered Jerusalem. And so the Gemara answers the case in the Baraisa is one where they took the fig into Jerusalem and then they took it out of Jerusalem. And that is why he is liable to receive the 3rd set of lashes. And the Gemara asks, if so, what is the purpose of stating this law? If the fig entered and exited Jerusalem, there is no novel element in the fact that one is liable to receive lashes. And the Gemara answers, there is a novel element in this law, as what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a case where one took figs into the city while they had the status of untithed produce, before terumos, the first tithe for the priests, and tithes, right, the next tithe for the Levites, were separated from it. And Rabbi Yosei holds that the status of gifts that were not yet separated from the produce is like that of gifts that were already separated. The novel element is that although the second tithe was not separated in practice, all the laws of second tithe are in effect with regard to the portion that he intends to separate as second tithe later, that he's designating to be separated later. Therefore, if after taking the untithed produce into Jerusalem, he separated the second tithe, and then he took it outside of Jerusalem and he ate it, he's liable to receive lashes. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Yosei hold that the status of gifts that were not yet separated from the produce is like that of gifts that were already separated? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yosei, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel did not disagree with regard to produce whose labor was not completed, and the obligation to tithe had consequently not yet taken effect, and which at that stage passed through Jerusalem, that its second tithe produce may be redeemed and may be eaten anywhere. As long as the obligation to tithe has not taken effect, the sanctity of Jerusalem does not affect the produce. Now, with regard to what case did they disagree? It is with regard to produce whose labor was already completed, and it passed through Jerusalem before terumas and tithes were separated from it. Beis Shammai say, since one is obligated to separate maaser sheini from this produce, and the produce was in Jerusalem, he must bring its maaser sheini back to Jerusalem, and it shall be eaten in Jerusalem. Beis Hillel say the produce may be redeemed and eaten anywhere. And if it enters your mind to say the status of gifts that were not yet separated from the produce is like that of gifts that were already separated, how can Beis Hillel hold that maaser sheini may be redeemed? Wasn't the produce admitted by the walls of Jerusalem? Therefore, even though maaser sheini was not yet separated, it can no longer be redeemed. So apparently Rabbi Yosei, who certainly holds in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel, holds that the status of gifts that were not yet separated from the produce is not like that of gifts that were already separated, right? If you carried untithed produce into Jerusalem, intending to separate the produce afterward, and then you carried that produce out, right? So it's like it was designated while you were in, and the second tithe, even though it had not been physically separated, it was part of that produce that went into Jerusalem and came out. So are you going to say that since the second tithe literally was in Jerusalem already, therefore we cannot bring it out? It has to just go back in and can only be eaten there? Or do we say, since it hadn't been separated at that time, and we carried that produce back out of Jerusalem and then separated the maaser sheini, that it's like maaser sheini that never entered Jerusalem in the first place, since it hadn't become maaser sheini at the time that it was in Jerusalem? Rabbah said the law of the wall with regard to eating maaser sheini, i.e., that maaser sheini may not be eaten outside the wall of Jerusalem, this is by Torah law. The law of the wall with regard to the admitting of maaser sheini, i.e., that once produce enters within the wall of Jerusalem, it may not be redeemed or taken beyond the wall, this is by rabbinic law. Meaning, Torah laws, we rule stringently. Rabbinic laws, we rule leniently. And when the sages issued a decree that one may not remove from Jerusalem maaser sheini that had already entered within the walls, they did so when the tithe is in its unadulterated form after it was separated. But in a case where it is still in its status of untithed produce, the sages did not issue such a decree. And Ravina said, Rabbi Yosef is referring to the case of maaser sheini produce that was already separated and brought into Jerusalem. The novel element of his statement is that he is referring to a fig that was not physically taken into Jerusalem. Rather, it is a case where one was holding the fig on a reed outside of Jerusalem while he is standing inside Jerusalem, and resolve the dilemma of Rav Papa and conclude that if one is standing inside Jerusalem and holding maaser sheini outside the city at the end of a reed pole, it is as though the produce had entered the city, as if it was in a backpack when you entered the city. Even if the backpack didn't go all the way in, it's considered that it has gone in and can now not come out again. And that concludes our discussion of Mishna number 2 here in chapter 3 of Tractate Makkos. We'll pick it up tomorrow night when Shabbos ends and I can get back online here in LA. I think last week I got on by like 9:30, but maybe a little early, 9:20. I'll really try hard, but it's just like, we run a little bit late at shul. I get home, we make Havdalah, and then I get out here as fast as I can. But I'm guessing it's probably going to be like 9:15, between 9:15 and 9:30 tomorrow night. Pacific. Okay, a few questions. Renee, I was at Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center, which was then in upstate New York, when I first heard Birkat Hamazon. So this is the grace after the meal, when that meal includes bread. The first time I heard it chanted joyously after Shabbos dinner. Obviously, I had said it and heard it before then, but the joy in it changed me and the way I say thank you to Hashem. Beautiful, beautiful. Certainly, and there's a very popular melody for singing the Birkas Hamazon that they use at all the Camp Ramaz, and it's really spread beyond the Jewish world. And even that, that's kind of conservative Judaism, but even that melody has spread into the Orthodox world very much, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful melody that people sing, and with gusto when they thank God for what they've just eaten. Sharon, one of my very dear friends, was a Holocaust survivor. When I asked him which holiday did he remember with the most fondness, I was surprised when he said Shavuos. They used to decorate their home and the synagogue with green branches in recollection of the Bechorim, and because Sinai bloomed at the time of the revelation. What a beautiful teaching, Sharon. I had not heard that. That is pretty awesome. Wow, beautiful. We definitely, here in this community, at Sukkot, right, on Hoshana Rabbah, when we beat the willow branches, you have like 5 branches tied together. The willow branches is part of the Arva and the Oh my gosh. And the lulav, there we go. The lulav and esrog. But specifically the willow branches, we take a little bundle of those and beat them on the ground on Hoshana Rabbah, and then we toss them on the aron, right, on the ark that houses the Torah scrolls, and there they sit, and so they kind of get old and dry, but there's greenery around the ark, and it sits there from Sukkot till Pesach, and then often it's taken down at that time and burned along with the chametz. Now you're telling me that they bring in fresh greens to decorate the ark at Shavuos. I love that. What a beautiful image. Tom, with regards to making the declaration, what about the descendant of a convert? I mean, it's a great question. It's a good question. I mean, he is not the descendant of one who were brought out of Egypt. The convert is not. And the descendant of a convert presumably would have the same issue. He's descended from somebody who was not brought out of Egypt. So maybe the descendant of a convert doesn't utter the verses. But they didn't teach that specifically. So I don't know. There's also a kind of traditional teaching that while converts have their families have been non-Jewish for as long as they know, there's a mystical teaching that somebody who finds his way to Judaism, it's because he was already connected. And it's like, and they were at Mount Sinai, and they did come out of Egypt. And somehow, somewhere along the line, something happened, right? But their soul was there at Mount Sinai, and now they've found their way back. That's a mystical teaching. It's not going to be one that's strong enough to overcome this idea that a ger does not recite the verses when he brings Bikurim. But we haven't done this in 2,000 years. Perhaps when Mashiach comes, the third temple is built, and Elijah, the prophet, will come back and answer halakhic questions that we've been unable to answer ourselves. Maybe he'll tell us that, no, indeed, the gerim do recite these verses. But until then, the halachas, they don't. Sharon, one of my favorite professors, but that's the ger himself. Your question, the descendants of gerim, I don't know the answer yet. Sharon, one of my favorite professors at JTS, Judith Hauptman, gave a great class on the Haggadah that we read at Passover. She felt that the wandering Aramean verses, even though they were recited at Shavuos in temple times, is central in the Haggadah because it is the most concise retelling of the history that the Seder is recounting. Just so. Exactly right. I like that. Thank you, Sharon. And Renee, I planted my garden this week. I was looking at my blackberry bushes in this morning and thinking that now, in the third year, it's remarkable how much fruit is coming in now. I did not pick fruit in the first 2 years. It seems that the patience has helped the plants. Right? You're talking about the commandment of Orla, which we don't pick for the first 3 years, right? And then in the fourth year is when we could start harvesting it. We would bring it to Jerusalem if we could. Fourth year fruit we use to decorate Jerusalem, but that option we don't have. So we can start eating Orla, fruit from a tree. I don't think we eat in the third year. I think we eat in the fourth year. It's the first 3 years that are off limits, but check with your local Orthodox rabbi to make sure. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night after Shabbos ends in LA. May everybody be blessed with a sweet and peaceful and uplifting and refreshing, rejuvenating Shabbos. We should hear only good news going into Shabbos. We should only hear good news during Shabbos, and may we only hear good news coming out of Shabbos.